When we think about prehistoric dangers, we imagine saber-toothed tigers, cave bears, and deadly predators, but the most dangerous hunter of ancient times wasn't a beast with claws or fangs, it was a creature much more like us. If you're using these to fall asleep, that's literally why I make them. So subscribe, maybe? And tell me, where are you and what time? I check comments and it's like Berlin at breakfast, Boston at bedtime, all at once. For hundreds of thousands of years, our planet was home to several human species existing at the same time. Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and others shared Earth, not always peacefully. Among them, one species stands out, not just for their tools or their brains, but for a darker reason. They may have been the first to systematically hunt their own kind. That species was Homo heidelbergensis. Living across Africa, Europe, and parts of Asia between 700,000 and 200,000 years ago, they occupied a pivotal place in our family tree. Often called the last common ancestor of modern humans and Neanderthals, they were beings of contradiction and complexity. The world they inhabited was harsh and unforgiving. Violent climate swings transformed landscapes within a few thousand years. Ice ages advanced and retreated, turning forests into frozen wastelands. In Africa, sudden droughts parched rivers and split habitats into isolated fragments. Resources became scarce, competition intensified, and Homo heidelbergensis had the tools, the strength, and the intelligence to impose themselves on their world. They weren't delicate creatures. Built like tanks, these hominins stood as tall as we do, but with heavier bones and broader shoulders. Their brain cases approached our size, averaging around 1,200 cubic centimeters. They weren't just brute force either. They were smart, social, and skilled. They crafted sophisticated tools, coordinated hunts, and likely communicated in ways beyond simple gestures. Their world was filled with danger from every direction. In Africa, they contended with giant hyenas, saber-toothed cats, and enormous crocodiles that could snatch them from riverbanks. In Europe, they faced cave lions larger than modern African lions and short-faced bears that could stand over 9 feet tall. In colder regions, packs of wolves, giant boars, and steppe mammoths posed constant threats, yet archaeological evidence suggests something disturbing. Beyond these natural dangers, Homo heidelbergensis may have faced another lethal threat. Others of their own kind. Across sites in Europe and Africa, a pattern emerges that can't be easily explained away. Skulls bearing signs of deliberate trauma, bones scraped clean of flesh, cut marks made by stone tools in places that suggest not ritual but butchery. At first, these findings seemed isolated, perhaps the result of desperate times during harsh climatic periods. But as more evidence accumulated, a darker possibility came into focus. What if Homo heidelbergensis wasn't just defending territory or resources? What if they actually hunted other humans? This wasn't some post-apocalyptic scenario from science fiction. These were thinking, tool-using, fire-making beings who may have viewed rival bands not just as competition, but as prey. If true, the origins of organized violence may extend much deeper into our evolutionary past than we once thought. The roots of warfare might not be in civilization, but buried in the ancient soils of Africa and Europe, in the very foundations of what makes us human. Deep within Spain's Atapuerca Mountains lies a site that has both fascinated and disturbed archaeologists since its discovery. Cima de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones. This cavern has yielded an unparalleled collection of hominin fossils, offering a window into the lives and deaths of our ancient relatives. Over 7,000 human bones representing at least 28 individuals have been found here. These remains are predominantly attributed to Homo Heidelbergensis, dating to around 430,000 years ago. The sheer number of individuals and how they were deposited has led researchers to ponder what circumstances led to their accumulation in this subterranean sepulchre. Among the most striking findings is cranium 17, which exhibits two distinct fractures on the frontal bone. These injuries would have been fatal, and their positioning suggests they were inflicted intentionally. The shape and size of the fractures, along with their different orientations, indicate they were likely produced with the same object in face-to-face conflict. The presence of multiple blows to an already fatally wounded individual suggests not just violence, but an intention to kill. This ancient murder mystery from deep time isn't isolated. Thousands of miles away in Ethiopia's Middle Awash Valley, another enigmatic discovery sheds light on the behaviours of these early humans. The Bodo cranium, unearthed in 1976, is a 600,000-year-old fossil also attributed to Homo heidelbergensis. This skull presents compelling evidence of deliberate defleshing. Numerous cut marks consistent with stone tool use are etched into the bone. These incisions are concentrated around muscle attachment sites, suggesting a systematic removal of flesh shortly after death. The intent behind this defleshing remains debated. Some researchers propose it represents an early form of mortuary practice. Others suggest it indicates cannibalistic behavior. The lack of associated skeletal remains makes it challenging to determine whether this act was driven by ritual motives or survival necessity. But the evidence of deliberate cutting is undeniable. A broader pattern emerges when we look at other archaeological sites. Evidence from the Cima de los Huesos and the Bodo site isn't isolated. Other findings suggest that violent encounters and possibly cannibalism may have been more widespread among ancient hominins than previously thought. A 1.45 million-year-old tibia discovered in northern Kenya exhibits cut marks indicative of flesh removal. Studies have assessed the caloric value of the human body to understand the potential nutritional motivations behind cannibalism. Findings suggest that while human flesh could provide protein and fat, it offers less energy compared to larger animals like mammoths or bison. This raises questions about whether these acts were primarily driven by hunger or if they served other social or ritualistic purposes. Perhaps it wasn't about nutrition at all, but about power, fear, or eliminating rivals. The recurring instances of skeletal trauma and cut marks across various sites point to a complex tapestry of behaviours among ancient hominins. While some evidence suggests survival cannibalism during periods of resource scarcity, other findings hint at ritualistic practices or acts of intergroup conflict. The intentional defleshing of the Bodo cranium and the traumatic injuries observed in the Cima de los Huesos assemblage suggest that Homo heidelbergensis engaged in behaviors that indicate a nuanced understanding of life, death, and perhaps even an early form of social control through violence. These findings compel us to confront the multifaceted nature of our evolutionary history. The path to modern humanity wasn't a simple march of progress, but shaped by a spectrum of behaviors, some of which mirror the complexities and contradictions of human interactions today. In the evolutionary arms race of survival, early humans developed an array of tools that not only facilitated hunting animals but also may have played pivotal roles in conflicts with other human groups. The sophistication and variety of these implements provide profound insights into the cognitive and social advancements of our ancestors. They also tell a story of how technologies developed for survival may have been turned toward domination. One of the most remarkable archaeological discoveries shedding light on early human hunting capabilities is the unearthing of wooden spears at Schöningen in Germany. Dating back approximately 300,000 years ago, these spears are attributed to Homo Heidelbergensis, or early Neanderthals. Crafted predominantly from spruce, these weapons measure about 6.5 feet in length and exhibit a design optimized for balance and aerodynamics. The distribution of weight with the center of gravity positioned forward implies they were designed for throwing, enabling hunters to strike prey from a distance. This technological innovation not only enhanced hunting efficiency but also reduced the risk associated with close encounters with large and dangerous animals. It also, potentially, allowed for killing at a distance, a significant advantage in intergroup conflict. The integration of stone tips onto wooden shafts marked another significant advancement. Evidence from Ethiopia reveals that hominins were crafting stone-tipped projectiles as early as 279,000 years ago, predating the emergence of Homo sapiens. Attaching stone points to wooden shafts required complex cognitive abilities and fine motor skills. It involved selecting appropriate materials, shaping them meticulously, and securely binding them together using adhesives derived from natural resources. These weren't crude clubs or simple sticks. They were sophisticated weapons requiring planning, expertise, and cultural transmission of knowledge. They were the product of minds not so different from our own. Beyond wood and stone, early humans also utilized bone to fashion tools and weapons. Bone tools dating back 1.5 million years have been unearthed at sites in Tanzania. These artifacts, crafted from the bones of large animals like elephants and hippos, exhibit deliberate shaping and wear patterns consistent with use in butchering and possibly hunting activities. The selection of specific bones and consistent methods of modification suggest a standardized approach to tool production. This implies not only an understanding of the functional properties of different materials, but also the transmission of knowledge and skills within early human communities. While these tools were primarily developed for hunting animals, their potential use in interpersonal conflicts cannot be overlooked. The ability to craft effective weapons would have conferred significant advantages in territorial disputes or competition over resources. The presence of skeletal remains with trauma consistent with weapon-inflicted injuries at various archaeological sites supports the notion that such tools were occasionally turned against fellow humans. The development and refinement of weaponry reflect a complex interplay of cognitive evolution, environmental pressures, and social dynamics. These tools not only facilitated survival in challenging landscapes, but also shaped the interactions and hierarchies within and between early human groups. When we study Homo Heidelbergensis, we're not just examining distant ancestors. We're witnessing the birth of behaviors that laid the groundwork for modern human society. From cooperation to conflict, from care to competition, the social lives of these early humans were complex, adaptive, and in some ways eerily familiar to our own communities today. Most paleoanthropologists agree that Homo Heidelbergensis lived in small, tight-knit social groups, likely ranging from 15 to 30 individuals. These bands were probably structured around kinship, much like later hunter-gatherer societies. Living in smaller units would have allowed for flexibility and mobility, vital traits in the unpredictable Pleistocene landscapes they inhabited. Seasonal movement was likely necessary as they followed game herds and accessed resources like fresh water, tool-making materials, and shelter. Evidence from sites in England and Germany reveals repeated occupations over time, suggesting that certain places served as recurring hubs for group activity. These may have been meeting points for multiple bands to exchange tools, mates, and knowledge. While Homo Heidelbergensis is often portrayed through a lens of violence or cannibalism, there is also evidence of deep social cohesion and care. Fossilized remains from Cima de los Huesos show healed injuries that would have required long-term care. One individual had severe hip dysplasia and would have been unable to walk unaided. The fact that such individuals survived for years indicates they weren't abandoned but supported by their group, a behavior considered distinctly human. This kind of care suggests cooperation beyond mere survival, hinting at emotional bonds, social roles, and perhaps even primitive empathy. These weren't solitary hunters, they were interdependent beings surviving through shared labor, protection, and possibly even food distribution. But where there is social cooperation, there is also tension. The fossil record points toward interpersonal violence and group-level conflict as well. The cranium-17 skull from Cima de los Huesos shows two near-identical fractures, strongly suggesting a deliberate killing, possibly even a form of execution or revenge. This raises important questions about social regulation within these groups. Were there rules, enforced norms, punishments? The evidence is too fragmentary to draw solid conclusions, but these trauma patterns suggest that Homo heidelbergensis was not immune to internal strife. In fact, they may have been the first human species to develop social mechanisms for conflict resolution or retribution. The beginnings of what we might call justice may lie here, alongside the origins of organized violence. Territorial behavior was likely another aspect of their social structure. With growing populations and limited resources, encounters between groups could turn violent. Sites across Europe and Africa suggest patterns of repeated settlement in resource-rich areas, implying that certain groups may have claimed and defended territories, especially near rivers or game migration routes. While there's no direct evidence of language, anatomical studies of the Homo heidelbergensis hyoid bone and cranial base suggest they may have had the physiological capacity for complex vocalizations. Combined with their large brain size and evidence of strategic hunting and tool use, it's likely that some form of proto-language was in place. This would have dramatically improved coordination, group hunting, social bonding, and the transmission of knowledge. And that culture may have extended to their treatment of the dead. At Cima de los Huesos, bodies appear to have been deliberately deposited in a deep chamber accessible only through treacherous passages. Whether this was a practical disposal method or the beginning of symbolic mortuary behavior is still debated, but it suggests cognitive and emotional development far beyond instinct. The physical and archaeological record suggests that violence was not an anomaly among Homo heidelbergensis, but perhaps an integrated aspect of their social fabric. As resources became scarce and populations expanded into overlapping territories, conflict between groups likely intensified. Evidence comes not only from the lethal cranial injuries at Cima de los Huesos, but also from comparative studies of trauma patterns found on other early hominin remains. These traumas, concentrated on the frontal and parietal bones, are consistent with blunt force trauma inflicted by handheld weapons, potentially stone tools or wooden clubs. Moreover, the fact that such injuries appear on individuals of all sexes and ages hints at a pattern of intergroup raids, territorial skirmishes, or internal disputes rather than isolated murders. The presence of advanced hunting tools such as the Schöningen spears could have easily been turned against rival humans, making Homo heidelbergensis not only apex predators of their environment, but at times predators of each other. Taken together, Homo heidelbergensis appears as a threshold species straddling the line between archaic instincts and modern mindsets. They exhibited empathy, but also aggression, community, but also conflict. They planned, hunted, protected their own, and at times killed them. They were the first humans to live in a social world that resembles ours in its full complexity: care, trust, betrayal, revenge, alliances, and perhaps even love. Homo heidelbergensis occupies a pivotal position in the human evolutionary narrative, serving as a bridge between earlier hominins such as Homo erectus and later species such as Neanderthals and modern humans. Their evolutionary journey, adaptability, and interactions have left an indelible mark on the genetic and cultural tapestry of subsequent human species. They weren't just another branch on our family tree, they were the trunk from which modern humanity grew. Emerging around 700,000 years ago, Homo heidelbergensis exhibited traits that were both reminiscent of their predecessors and indicative of future evolutionary developments. Their anatomical features, including a larger brain case averaging approximately 1,200 to 1,300 cubic centimeters, robust build, and advanced tool-making abilities, suggest a species well adapted to diverse environments ranging from the savannas of Africa to the temperate regions of Europe. The dispersal of Homo heidelbergensis across Africa and Eurasia set the stage for regional populations to adapt to local conditions, leading to the emergence of distinct lineages. In Europe and Western Asia, these populations are believed to have evolved into Neanderthals, while in Asia, they gave rise to the Denisovans. In Africa, they are considered direct ancestors of modern humans, Homo sapiens. This diversification underscores the species' adaptability and their central role in human evolution. They weren't an evolutionary dead end, but a successful branch point from which multiple human species emerged. Recent genetic analyses have illuminated the complex interbreeding events among these descendant species. Studies indicate that early modern humans interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans, resulting in the incorporation of archaic genetic material into the modern human genome. Approximately 1 to 3% of the DNA in non-African human populations is derived from Neanderthals, with certain populations in Oceania exhibiting up to 4% Denisovan ancestry. These genetic contributions have been linked to adaptations in immunity, skin pigmentation, metabolism, and even blood oxygenation, highlighting the enduring impact of Homo heidelbergensis descendants on modern human biology. The archaeological record provides evidence of sophisticated behaviors among Homo heidelbergensis, including the controlled use of fire, construction of shelters, and cooperative hunting strategies. Sites such as Schöningen in Germany have yielded wooden spears dating back over 300,000 years, indicative of advanced planning and tool skills. These cultural innovations not only facilitated their survival in varied environments, but also laid the groundwork for the complex behaviors observed in later hominin species. The seeds of what we call civilization were already being planted. The decline of Homo heidelbergensis populations appears to have been a gradual process influenced by climatic fluctuations, resource competition, and interactions with emerging hominin species. Ironically, descending directly from Homo heidelbergensis, newer species like Homo sapiens covering most of Africa, Neanderthals occupying most of Europe, and Denisovans inhabiting Western Asia and parts of Siberia may have outcompeted their ancestor. Homo heidelbergensis was faced with its very own descendants that were better adapted to each environment, stronger, with larger brain cases, more cooperative, more agile, or with greater dexterity. And finally, as Homo sapiens began to migrate out of Africa around 60,000 years ago, they encountered and interbred with Neanderthal and Denisovan populations, leading to a complex web of genetic and cultural exchanges. Over time, these interactions, coupled with environmental pressures, contributed to the eventual replacement of archaic hominins by anatomically modern humans. And perhaps in a twist of evolutionary irony, the hunter became the hunted. Homo heidelbergensis didn't just disappear. Their bodies, behaviors, and genes live on in us. When we look in the mirror, a shadow of them looks back, in the structure of our bones, the workings of our immune systems, and perhaps even in our capacity for both violence and compassion. If you could travel back in time and meet a band of Homo heidelbergensis, you might be struck not by how different they were, but by how familiar they would seem. Their faces would be more robust than ours, with prominent brow ridges and no chins. Their bodies would be powerfully built, adapted for a physically demanding lifestyle in harsh environments. But you would recognize the intelligence in their eyes. You would see the care with which they crafted their tools. You would notice how they looked after their sick and wounded. And you might glimpse in their social dynamics patterns that echo through our societies today. They weren't just proto-humans, not quite evolved enough to qualify as people. They were a fully realized species with their own adaptations, their own solutions to the challenges of survival, their own ways of being human. The story of Homo heidelbergensis challenges us to reconsider what we think we know about human nature. Are we inherently peaceful or violent, cooperative or competitive, altruistic or selfish? The answer, as their fossil record suggests, is that we are all of these things. Human nature isn't one-dimensional, but contains multitudes, the capacity for extraordinary kindness alongside the potential for calculated cruelty. This contradiction isn't a modern development or a product of civilization. It appears to be woven into the very fabric of what makes us human, dating back hundreds of thousands of years to our shared ancestor, Homo heidelbergensis. The discovery of deliberate violence among Homo heidelbergensis doesn't necessarily paint them as exceptionally brutal by human standards. Rather, it suggests they were already grappling with the same social challenges that have defined human groups throughout history. How do we distribute resources? How do we resolve conflicts? How do we protect our group from threats, including other humans? How do we balance individual desires against collective needs? These questions didn't begin with written laws or formal governments. They were already being worked out through trial and error, success and tragedy, in the small bands of Homo heidelbergensis that walked the earth hundreds of thousands of years ago. The evidence from sites like Cima de los Huesos presents us with a paradox. The same individuals who showed care for their disabled group members may have also participated in violent acts against others. This isn't unique to Homo heidelbergensis. Throughout human history, we've seen the same pattern: extraordinary compassion for those within our perceived group, alongside the capacity to dehumanize and harm those deemed outsiders. Understanding the roots of this dual nature doesn't excuse violence, but it might help us recognize the deep evolutionary patterns we're working with as we strive to build more peaceful societies. If Homo heidelbergensis indeed engaged in systematic violence against other human groups, they wouldn't be unique in the animal kingdom. Many social mammals, including our closest relatives, chimpanzees, engage in lethal intergroup conflict. What may have set Homo heidelbergensis apart was the cognitive capacity to plan such conflicts, to develop specialized weapons, to coordinate attacks, and perhaps to conceptualize the other in increasingly complex ways. These cognitive abilities, the same ones that allowed for sophisticated cooperation, tool-making, and care for the vulnerable, also enabled more organized forms of violence. The same mental tools can be used to build or to destroy, to heal or to harm. The story of Homo heidelbergensis isn't just about the past, it's about understanding the complex legacy they've left in our bodies, our societies, and our behaviors. By studying these ancient relatives, we gain insight not only into human evolution, but into human nature itself, both its darkness and its light. As we continue to uncover and interpret the traces they left behind, we piece together not just their story, but our own. We come to understand that the capacities for both great violence and extraordinary compassion aren't recent developments, but fundamental aspects of being human. Perhaps the most important lesson from Homo heidelbergensis is that our future isn't determined by our evolutionary past. Understanding our innate tendencies doesn't mean we're bound by them. The same big brains that enabled more sophisticated forms of violence also allow us to reflect on our behavior, to make conscious choices, to create cultural systems that channel our instincts in more constructive directions. Homo heidelbergensis used their cognitive abilities to survive in a harsh world, developing new technologies and social strategies that gave them an edge. We can use our even more developed cognitive abilities to create a world where violence becomes less necessary and less rewarded. The archaeological record of Homo heidelbergensis shows us where we came from. The choices we make today will determine where we go next. One of the most fascinating aspects of studying Homo heidelbergensis is considering how their social lives might have functioned day to day. While we can't observe their behaviors directly, the archaeological evidence combined with studies of both modern humans and great apes allows us to make informed inferences. Within their small bands of 15 to 30 individuals, daily life would have centered around the necessities of survival, obtaining food, maintaining shelter, crafting tools, and raising young. But as with all social primates, there would have been a rich tapestry of interpersonal dynamics as well. Status hierarchies would have existed, with certain individuals commanding more respect or authority than others. Perhaps those who were particularly skilled at hunting, tool-making, or other valuable activities gained prestige within the group. Perhaps older individuals with accumulated knowledge were respected for their wisdom. Perhaps physical strength played a role in determining leadership, especially in contexts of defense or conflict. Social bonds would have been reinforced through daily activities and interactions. Grooming, food sharing, cooperative childcare, and collaborative hunting would have strengthened relationships within the group. Individuals would have formed closer bonds with some group members than others, creating a complex social network of alliances, friendships, and perhaps even rivalries. Communication would have been essential, though likely not as sophisticated as modern human language. Vocalizations, gestures, facial expressions, and body language would have conveyed basic information about food sources, potential dangers, emotional states, and social intentions. The ability to coordinate hunting efforts, particularly of large and dangerous prey, suggests that Homo heidelbergensis had developed effective communication systems. The complexity of their tools also indicates the ability to transmit knowledge across generations. Conflict within groups was likely inevitable, just as it is in all social species. Competition for resources, mates, or status could have led to tensions. The evidence of healed injuries suggests that while violence occurred, there were also mechanisms for reconciliation and continued coexistence after conflicts. Groups may have developed rudimentary cultural norms to manage these tensions, shared understandings about acceptable and unacceptable behaviors, perhaps enforced through social sanctions like temporary ostracism or withholding of resources. The relation between different groups of Homo Heidelbergensis would have been complex and likely varied based on circumstances. Archaeological evidence suggests that different bands occupied distinct territories, particularly in resource-rich areas. When resources were abundant, encounters between groups might have been relatively peaceful, perhaps even providing opportunities for exchange of mates to maintain genetic diversity. In times of scarcity, however, competition could turn violent. The evidence of lethal trauma in some Homo Heidelbergensis remains, particularly the patterns consistent with intentional targeting of the head, suggests organized intergroup violence did occur. This raises profound questions about the cognitive and emotional lives of these ancient humans. Did they conceptualize members of other groups as fundamentally different from themselves? Did they tell stories about rival bands, passing down grudges or alliances through generations? Did they experience the same emotions we do when engaged in conflict, fear, anger, perhaps even the intoxication of victory or the despair of defeat? The archaeological record can't tell us directly, but given their brain size and apparent behavioral complexity, it's reasonable to infer they had rich emotional lives not entirely unlike our own. The technological achievements of Homo Heidelbergensis offer another window into their cognitive capabilities. The wooden spears found at Schöningen aren't crude weapons, but carefully crafted tools that required planning, precision, and an understanding of materials. The placement of the center of gravity in these spears suggests an intuitive grasp of physics. The symmetry of their stone tools demonstrates an aesthetic sense and attention to detail beyond mere functionality. These weren't beings operating solely on instinct or simple learned behaviors. They were thinking, planning, imagining possibilities, and solving problems creatively, all hallmarks of advanced cognition. The question of whether Homo Heidelbergensis engaged in cannibalism remains one of the most provocative aspects of their study. The evidence is compelling but not conclusive, and interpreting it requires careful consideration of both the archaeological findings and the broader context of human evolution. Cut marks on bones can be produced in different ways. While butchery for consumption is one possibility, similar marks could result from defleshing as part of mortuary practices, removing soft tissue before burial or secondary treatment of remains. The location and pattern of cut marks can provide clues to the intent. Marks clustered around muscle attachments suggest deliberate removal of meat, while those in other locations might indicate different purposes. At the Bodo site in Ethiopia, the cut marks on the skull are concentrated around muscle attachment sites, consistent with defleshing, but without the rest of the skeleton, it's impossible to determine if this was part of a cannibalistic practice or a mortuary ritual. Similarly, at Cima de los Huesos in Spain, the accumulation of bodies in a deep pit suggests deliberate disposal, but whether this followed consumption of flesh remains uncertain. The evidence from Grandolina in Spain, dating to around 800,000 years ago, provides some of the strongest indications of cannibalism among early humans. Here, human bones show the same patterns of butchery marks as animal bones found at the site, suggesting similar processing. If Homo heidelbergensis did engage in cannibalism, what might have motivated this behavior? Nutritional need is one possibility, particularly during periods of resource scarcity. Human flesh provides protein and fat, though less efficiently than larger game animals. Ritual or cultural practices offer another explanation. Throughout human history, some societies have practiced endocannibalism, consuming deceased group members as part of funeral rites, often as a way of honoring the dead or incorporating their essence back into the community. Aggressive cannibalism, consuming members of rival groups, has also been documented in some human societies, sometimes as an expression of dominance or a way to acquire the strength or qualities of defeated enemies. The archaeological record alone cannot tell us which, if any, of these motivations might have driven Homo heidelbergensis. What it does tell us is that these early humans had complex relationships with death, with the bodies of their own kind, and potentially with rival groups. Whether or not they consumed human flesh, the evidence suggests they interacted with human remains in deliberate ways, indicating cognitive and cultural complexity beyond what we might expect from their place in our evolutionary timeline. This complexity extends to other aspects of their behavior as well. The wooden spears found at Schöningen in Germany represent a level of technological sophistication that requires not just manual dexterity, but foresight, planning, and cultural transmission of knowledge. To create these weapons, Homo heidelbergensis had to select appropriate wood, shape it precisely using stone tools, and understand principles of balance and aerodynamics. The spears were designed with their centers of gravity in the front third, optimizing them for throwing, a feature that modern javelin designers would recognize. This wasn't simple trial and error, but reflected a deep understanding of the materials and physics involved. Such knowledge would have been accumulated over generations and taught to younger members of the group, suggesting a capacity for cultural learning that is distinctly human. The sophistication of their hunting strategies also speaks to their cognitive abilities. Evidence from sites like Boxgrove in England shows they were capable of bringing down large, dangerous prey like rhinos and giant deer, feats that would have required cooperation, communication, and strategic thinking. Homo heidelbergensis likely employed ambush hunting techniques, another indication of their ability to plan, coordinate, and anticipate the behavior of their prey. These same cognitive skills, planning, coordination, anticipation, would have been equally applicable to intergroup conflicts. Indeed, the parallels between hunting strategies and warfare are striking in many hunter-gatherer societies. The same techniques used to stalk and kill dangerous prey can be applied to rival human groups. The same weapons effective against animals are equally effective against humans. This raises a provocative question. Did hunting large game provide not just nutritional benefits, but also training for intergroup conflict? Did success in one arena translate to advantages in the other? The evidence of healed injuries in Homo heidelbergensis fossils tells us another important story about their social lives. Individuals who survived serious wounds would have required care from others in their group, access to food and water, protection from predators, perhaps even treatment of injuries. One individual from Cima de los Huesos had a severe congenital hip deformity that would have limited mobility from birth. The fact that this person survived to adulthood suggests not just occasional assistance, but a lifetime of support from the group. This capacity for sustained caregiving indicates strong social bonds and perhaps even a sense of responsibility toward vulnerable group members. It suggests a level of empathy and altruism that we recognize as deeply human. Yet this same species also shows evidence of interpersonal violence. Cranium 17 from Cima de los Huesos bears the marks of 2 severe blows to the head delivered with the same object from different angles, likely a deliberate killing rather than an accident. How do we reconcile these seemingly contradictory behaviors? the capacity for extended care alongside the capacity for lethal violence. Perhaps the answer lies in the distinction between in-group and out-group. Studies of both human societies and our closest primate relatives, chimpanzees, show a similar pattern. Individuals show care, cooperation, and altruism toward members of their own group, while sometimes displaying aggression toward outsiders, particularly when competing for limited resources. This dual nature, cooperation within groups coupled with competition between groups, may be deeply rooted in our evolutionary history. If so, Homo heidelbergensis would have exhibited these same tendencies, caring for their own while sometimes conflicting with others. The physical attributes of Homo heidelbergensis offer additional insights into their lives and behaviors. Their robust build, with thick bones and strong muscle attachments, indicates they were powerfully built, adapted for a physically demanding lifestyle. Men stood around 5 feet 9 inches tall on average, women somewhat shorter, but both sexes would have been significantly stronger than modern humans of the same size. Their bodies were built for endurance and power, necessary attributes for a life of hunting and gathering in challenging environments. Their skulls combined archaic features like prominent brow ridges with more modern characteristics, including larger brain cases. This mixture of traits reflects their transitional position in human evolution, no longer Homo erectus, but not yet Neanderthals or Homo sapiens. The brain size of Homo heidelbergensis, averaging between 1,200 and 1,300 cubic centimeters, approaches that of modern humans. This substantial neural capacity would have supported complex cognition, including abstract thinking, problem-solving, and social intelligence. Their teeth and jaws were adapted for a varied diet, capable of processing both plant foods and meat. Dental analysis suggests they consumed everything from fruits and nuts to tough, fibrous plants and animal flesh, the omnivorous diet that has characterized humans throughout our evolution. This dietary flexibility would have been a significant advantage, allowing Homo heidelbergensis to survive in diverse environments and adapt to changing conditions. It may also have influenced their social structures, as different food sources require different collection strategies. Gathering plant foods often benefits from cooperation among many individuals, while hunting large game typically requires smaller, coordinated teams. A mixed subsistence strategy would have favored the development of complex social arrangements that could accommodate both approaches. The geographical distribution of Homo heidelbergensis fossils tells us they were remarkably adaptable, occupying territories from the tropical regions of Africa to the temperate zones of Europe and possibly parts of Asia. This wide range indicates they possessed not just the physical adaptations, but also the behavioral flexibility and technological skills to thrive in dramatically different environments, from savanna to woodland to the edges of the ice sheets that covered northern Europe during glacial periods. Their expansion across such diverse territories would have required innovations in shelter, clothing, food acquisition, and social organization. Different groups would have developed specialized knowledge suited to local conditions, perhaps leading to the first distinct cultures within a single human species. As these populations became geographically isolated and adapted to their specific environments, they began to diverge genetically and morphologically, eventually giving rise to different human species: Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, and Homo sapiens in Africa. This pattern of divergence, followed by occasional reconnection and interbreeding, has characterized human evolution for hundreds of thousands of years. It's not a simple linear progression, but a complex branching and rejoining of populations, a network rather than a ladder. Modern genetic studies have revealed the extent of this interconnection. Most humans today carry small percentages of Neanderthal DNA, and some populations, particularly in Oceania, have significant Denisovan ancestry as well. These genetic contributions aren't just curiosities, but have played important roles in our adaptation and survival. Genes inherited from Neanderthals and Denisovans have influenced our immune systems, metabolism, adaptation to high altitudes, and even our susceptibility to certain diseases. The legacy of Homo Heidelbergensis lives on not just in our bodies but in our behaviours. The technological innovations they pioneered, sophisticated stone tools, wooden weapons, controlled use of fire, formed the foundation upon which later human cultures built. Their social structures, balancing cooperation within groups with competition between them, echo through human history and into our present. The fundamental tensions they navigated between individual and group interests, between peacemaking and warfare, between trust and suspicion, remain with us today. Even their cognitive patterns, the ability to plan for the future, to communicate through symbols, to create and follow social norms, to distinguish between us and them, continue to shape how we think and act in the modern world. In this sense, Homo Heidelbergensis isn't just an extinct species of ancient human, but a window into our own nature. By studying them, we learn not only about our past, but about ourselves, our capabilities, our contradictions, our possibilities. The story of Homo Heidelbergensis challenges simple narratives about human nature and human progress. They weren't primitive brutes, nor were they peaceful innocents living in harmony with nature and each other. Like us, they contained multitudes, the capacity for both extraordinary cooperation and calculated violence. This complexity isn't unique to Homo heidelbergensis or to humans in general. Many social species navigate similar tensions between cooperation and conflict, between individual interests and group welfare. What sets humans apart is the scale and sophistication of our solutions to these universal challenges. With our expanded cognitive abilities, we've created increasingly complex cultural systems to channel our basic tendencies in constructive directions, from kinship systems to legal codes, from religious beliefs to international treaties. These cultural innovations build upon the foundation laid by species like Homo heidelbergensis. The archaeological record of Homo heidelbergensis reveals a species in transition, developing the physical, cognitive, and social attributes that would come to define later humans. Their story is neither a simple tale of progress nor a cautionary narrative about innate human aggression. Instead, it's a complex account of adaptation and innovation, of groups finding ways to survive and sometimes thrive in challenging conditions, of cognitive and cultural evolution working alongside biological changes to create new ways of being human. As we continue to uncover and interpret the traces they left behind, we gain not just knowledge of an extinct human species, but insight into the deep roots of our own behaviors, societies, and cognitive patterns. The sophisticated weapons crafted by Homo heidelbergensis reveal much about their cognitive abilities and social organization. The wooden spears found at Schöningen, Germany, dating to around 400,000 years ago, represent a significant technological achievement. Made from spruce wood, these spears average around 2 meters in length and show careful craftsmanship. The makers selected straight-grained wood, removed the bark, and shaped the spears with stone tools, creating weapons with aerodynamic properties similar to modern javelins. The production of such weapons required planning, precision, and an understanding of materials that goes far beyond instinctive tool use. It suggests not just intelligence, but the ability to mentally project into the future, to envision a finished product and the steps needed to create it. Moreover, these weren't isolated innovations, but part of a cultural tradition. The consistency in design across multiple spheres indicates shared knowledge and techniques passed down through teaching and learning, a hallmark of cumulative culture that is distinctively human. The spears themselves tell us about hunting strategies. With their balance optimized for throwing, they allowed hunters to strike from a distance, reducing the risks associated with close contact hunting of dangerous prey. This technological adaptation would have provided a significant advantage, potentially increasing hunting success while decreasing injuries and deaths among hunters. It represents a solution to one of the fundamental challenges faced by predators: how to secure food while minimizing personal risk. But technologies rarely serve only a single purpose. The same spears effective against horses, deer, or rhinos would have been equally effective against other humans. The capacity to project force at a distance would have changed the dynamics of intergroup conflict, just as it changed the dynamics of hunting. Did Homo Heidelbergensis develop these weapons primarily for hunting and only incidentally use them in conflicts with other groups? Or did the threat of human rivals provide additional incentive for weapons development? The archaeological record can't tell us motivations, only outcomes. What it does tell us is that by 400,000 years ago, humans had developed the technological capability for lethal violence at a distance, a capability that would continue to evolve through human history, from spears to bows to firearms to missiles, each innovation expanding the reach and impact of human conflict. The stone tools used by Homo heidelbergensis also demonstrate considerable sophistication. They produced bifacial hand axes with remarkable symmetry and standardization, suggesting not just functional concerns, but perhaps aesthetic considerations as well. Some particularly fine examples, like the quartzite hand axe found at Cima de los Huesos, dubbed Excalibur, show levels of craftsmanship that go beyond utilitarian needs. Did such finely made objects serve as status markers? Did they have symbolic significance? Were they traded between groups? These questions touch on one of the most fascinating aspects of human evolution, the emergence of symbolic thought and behavior. While we have clear evidence of symbolic expression in later humans, including cave art, personal ornaments, and ritual burials, the record for Homo heidelbergensis is more ambiguous. The placement of bodies at Cima de los Huesos suggests some form of mortuary practice, but whether this had symbolic or ritual dimensions remains uncertain. Similarly, the fine craftsmanship of some tools hints at concerns beyond mere functionality, but doesn't definitively establish symbolic thinking. What we can say with confidence is that Homo heidelbergensis possessed cognitive capabilities that approached those of modern humans in many respects. Their technological achievements, hunting strategies, and social organizations all point to advanced problem-solving abilities, planning, and cultural learning. The environmental challenges faced by Homo heidelbergensis would have been substantial. During their time span of approximately 700,000 to 200,000 years ago, Earth experienced multiple glacial interglacial cycles, with dramatic shifts in climate, vegetation, and animal populations. In Europe, they would have contended with advancing and retreating ice sheets, transforming landscapes from temperate forests to tundra and back again within the span of a few thousand years. These changes would have required constant adaptation, learning new hunting strategies, identifying new plant foods, developing new technology suited to changing conditions. In Africa, climate fluctuations brought alternating periods of humidity and aridity, expanding and contracting habitable zones. Groups would have needed to adjust their territories and resource exploitation strategies in response, perhaps coming into more frequent contact. And conflict with other groups during periods of environmental stress. These environmental pressures may have been a significant driver of both technological innovation and social complexity. Groups that could cooperate effectively, share knowledge, and develop new solutions would have had advantages over those that couldn't. At the same time, competition for diminishing resources during periods of environmental stress might have intensified intergroup conflicts. The archaeological evidence of traumatic injuries consistent with interpersonal violence may reflect these pressures. The global climate changes during the Middle Pleistocene weren't just background conditions, but active shapers of human evolution. They created selective pressures favoring larger brains, more sophisticated technologies, and more complex social organizations, all characteristics that defined Homo heidelbergensis and their descendants. The story of Homo heidelbergensis isn't just about the past, but offers insights relevant to our present and future. As we face our own environmental challenges, including anthropogenic climate change, what can we learn from these ancient relatives who navigated dramatic climate shifts? Perhaps the most important lesson is the value of adaptability, technological, social, and cognitive. Homo heidelbergensis survived and thrived across diverse environments, not because they were the strongest or fastest, but because they could innovate, cooperate, and transmit knowledge across generations. These same capacities, innovation, cooperation, cultural learning, remain our greatest assets in addressing contemporary challenges. The technological ingenuity that produced the Schöningen spears has its modern parallel in renewable energy systems and sustainable agriculture. The social cooperation that allowed Homo heidelbergensis to care for injured group members and coordinate complex hunts finds expression today in our scientific collaborations, humanitarian efforts, and international agreements, and the cognitive flexibility that enabled them to adapt to changing conditions continues to serve us as we navigate a rapidly transforming world, though now our transformations are largely of our own making rather than the result of natural climate cycles. Yet we also inherit their limitations and contradictions, the same capacity for distinguishing between us and them that may have facilitated intergroup conflict for Homo heidelbergensis continues to divide human societies today, often with destructive consequence. The tension between cooperation and competition, between caring for our own and securing advantages over others, remains a central challenge of human existence, one that has deep roots in our evolutionary history. By understanding the complex legacy of species like Homo heidelbergensis, we gain perspective on these enduring aspects of human nature. We see that our capacities for both violence and compassion, for both conflict and cooperation, aren't recent developments but fundamental aspects of being human. This understanding doesn't determine our fate, but expands our awareness of the patterns we're working with as we shape our future. It helps us recognize both the destructive tendencies we need to channel and the constructive capacities we can build upon. In this sense, the study of Homo heidelbergensis isn't just an academic exercise, but a mirror that reflects our own nature back to us, not to trap us in predetermined patterns, but to help us make more conscious choices about who we want to become. The question of how and why Homo heidelbergensis engaged in violence against their own kind leads us to one of the most debated topics in anthropology, the origins of warfare in human evolution. Some researchers argue that organized intergroup violence is a relatively recent development emerging with the advent of agriculture and settled communities around 10,000 years ago. In this view, hunter-gatherer societies were generally peaceful, with violence limited to isolated incidents rather than systematic conflict. Others contend that the roots of warfare run much deeper, pointing to evidence of violent deaths and traumatic injuries in archaeological remains dating back hundreds of thousands of years. The patterns of injury seen in some Homo Heidelbergensis fossils, they suggest, are consistent with organized intergroup violence rather than random accidents or isolated murders. Studies of our closest primate relatives provide additional context for this debate. Chimpanzees, with whom we share a common ancestor from around 7 million years ago, engage in what some researchers describe as primitive warfare, organized raids by groups of males into the territories of neighboring communities with lethal attacks on isolated individuals. If this behavior emerged before the split between the human and chimpanzee lineages, it could be deeply rooted in our evolutionary history. Homo Heidelbergensis, in this scenario, would have inherited the same tendencies toward coalitional violence. Alternatively, if warfare-like behaviors evolved independently in humans and chimpanzees, it suggests that similar ecological and social conditions can produce similar behavioral outcomes across different species, a case of convergent evolution rather than shared ancestry. The debate isn't merely academic. How we understand the origins of human conflict shapes how we think about its inevitability and the possibilities for creating more peaceful societies. If warfare is a recent cultural invention, it might be more easily modified or abandoned. If it has deep evolutionary roots, the challenge becomes not eliminating these tendencies, but channeling them in less destructive directions. The evidence from Homo Heidelbergensis doesn't definitively resolve this debate, but it adds important pieces to the puzzle. The combination of sophisticated weapons, territorial behavior, and traumatic injuries consistent with interpersonal violence suggests that at minimum, the capacity for organized conflict was present hundreds of thousands of years ago. Whether this capacity was regularly expressed in actual conflicts, and whether these conflicts rose to the level we would call warfare, remains less certain. The archaeological record provides snapshots of individual events, not continuous observation of behavior patterns. What we can say with confidence is that by the time of Homo Heidelbergensis, humans possessed both the technological means and cognitive abilities necessary for organized violence against other groups. The question isn't whether they could engage in such behavior, but under what circumstances they did so. Modern hunter-gatherer societies provide some insights into these circumstances. Anthropological studies suggest that intergroup conflict is more common when resources are scarce or unpredictably distributed, when population densities increase, when groups are more sedentary and territorial, and when there are clear distinctions between us and them. The Middle Pleistocene world inhabited by Homo Heidelbergensis would have included periods when many of these conditions were present, times of climate stress when resources became concentrated in smaller areas leading to higher population densities in habitable zones and increased competition between groups. Under such conditions, conflict over resources would have been more likely, particularly if groups had developed strong territorial attachments to specific areas. The evidence of repeated occupation at certain sites suggests such attachments did exist. But we should be cautious about projecting a constant state of warfare or endemic violence. Even in modern contexts where intergroup conflict occurs, it's rarely continuous. Periods of tension and occasional violent confrontation alternate with periods of relative peace, trade, and even intermarriage between groups. Homo heidelbergensis likely followed similar patterns, with relationships between groups fluid and changing based on environmental conditions, resource availability, historical interactions, and perhaps even personal connections across group boundaries. The complexity of these interactions, neither constant war nor perpetual peace, but a dynamic mix of cooperation, competition, and occasional conflict, feels distinctly human. It's a pattern we continue to see throughout human history and into our present. One of the most intriguing questions about Homo heidelbergensis is the nature of their cognitive and emotional lives. While we can never know with certainty what it was like to be a member of this species, the archaeological record combined with our understanding of human evolution provides some clues. Their brain size, approaching that of modern humans, suggests they possessed significant cognitive capabilities. The complexity of their tools, hunting strategies, and social organizations all point to advanced problem-solving abilities, planning, and perhaps even abstract thinking. Did they have language? The anatomical evidence, including the structure of the hyoid bone and the neural pathways suggested by endocasts of their skulls, indicates they had the physical capability for complex vocalization and language processing. While we can't know the specifics of their communication systems, it's reasonable to infer they had at least proto-linguistic abilities, perhaps not the full syntactic complexity of modern human languages, but more sophisticated than the communication systems of other primates. Such communication capabilities would have been crucial for coordinating hunting activities, transmitting technological knowledge, maintaining social bonds, and navigating the complex interpersonal dynamics of their groups. Did they have a sense of self? Did they experience emotions similar to ours? Did they ponder abstract concepts like death, time, or causality? These questions push at the boundaries of what archaeology can tell us. What we do know is that their brains had the structures associated with these capacities in modern humans. The prefrontal cortex, linked to planning, decision-making, and social cognition, was well developed. The neural architecture for complex emotional processing was present. Their behaviors, caring for injured group members, crafting tools that required planning and aesthetic judgment, engaging in what appear to be mortuary practices, all suggest cognitive and emotional lives with depth and complexity. They may not have had the full range of abstract thinking and symbolic representation that characterizes modern humans, but they weren't simply operating on instinct or basic learned behaviors. They were thinking, feeling beings navigating a complex social and natural world. The transition from Homo heidelbergensis to later human species remains an area of active research and debate. In Europe, the evidence suggests a gradual evolution from Homo heidelbergensis to early Neanderthals, with transitional forms appearing around 300,000 years ago. In Africa, a similar process may have led from Homo heidelbergensis to early Homo sapiens, though this transition is less well documented due to gaps in the fossil record. The emergence of modern humans appears to have been a complex process, potentially involving multiple populations and regions within Africa. The Asian branch of Homo heidelbergensis likely gave rise to the Denisovans, though again, the fossil record is sparse. Most of what we know about Denisovans comes from genetic analysis rather than physical remains. These transitions weren't sudden replacements, but gradual processes occurring over tens of thousands of years. During these periods, populations with intermediate features existed, showing combinations of traits associated with both ancestor and descendant species. This pattern of gradual evolution with fuzzy boundaries between species is typical of biological evolution generally. It's only in retrospect, looking at the endpoints of these processes, that we see clear distinctions between species. The descendants of Homo heidelbergensis, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens continued to exhibit many of the behavioral patterns established by their common ancestor. All were capable toolmakers, successful hunters, and socially complex beings. All three species appear to have engaged in both cooperative behaviors within groups and competitive or sometimes violent interactions between groups. The archaeological record for Neanderthals includes evidence of both care for injured individuals and interpersonal violence, mirroring the pattern seen in Homo heidelbergensis. As modern humans expanded out of Africa, beginning around 200,000 years ago, they encountered these other human species in Europe and Asia. The nature of these encounters has been debated, with some researchers suggesting violent conflict and others emphasizing potential cooperation and interbreeding. The genetic evidence confirms that interbreeding did occur, with modern non-African humans carrying small percentages of Neanderthal DNA and some populations, particularly in Oceania, having significant Denisovan ancestry as well. This doesn't rule out conflict, of course. Throughout human history, war and marriage have often gone hand in hand, with periods of violent conflict alternating with periods of alliance and exchange. The interactions between different human species may have followed similar patterns. Eventually, both Neanderthals and Denisovans disappeared, with Homo sapiens becoming the sole surviving human species. The reasons for their extinction remain debated, with possibilities including climate change, competition with modern humans for resources, direct conflict, or some combination of these factors. Whatever the specific causes, by around 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens was the only human species left. We had inherited the Earth, along with the complex legacy of our common ancestor, Homo heidelbergensis, including both our capacity for violence and our capacity for cooperation. This legacy continues to shape our societies today. The fundamental tensions they navigated between individual and group interests, between cooperation within groups and competition between them, between short-term gains and long-term sustainability, remain central challenges of human existence. The technologies they pioneered have evolved in complexity but still serve the same basic functions, providing food, shelter, protection, and advantages in both cooperation and conflict. The cognitive abilities they developed, planning, problem-solving, social intelligence, continue to define our species. Even the darker aspects of their legacy, the capacity for organized violence against other groups, persist, though now modulated by cultural institutions, ethical frameworks, and global interconnections that would have been unimaginable to our ancient relatives. By understanding this deep history, we gain perspective on our present. We see that many of our most pressing challenges aren't new, but extensions of dynamics that have been part of the human experience for hundreds of thousands of years. And perhaps most importantly, we recognize that while our basic tendencies may have deep evolutionary roots, our specific expressions of these tendencies are shaped by culture, choice, and circumstance. Knowing where we come from doesn't determine where we're going, but it can help us navigate more consciously toward the future we want to create. The story of Homo heidelbergensis and their potential role as the first human predators of other humans raises profound questions about human nature and the origins of violence in our species. Are we inherently violent? Is conflict between groups an inevitable aspect of human existence? Or are these behaviors primarily shaped by environment, resource availability, and cultural learning? The evidence from Homo Heidelbergensis suggests a complex answer. Like us, they appear to have been capable of both extraordinary cooperation and organized violence. They cared for their vulnerable and crafted beautiful tools, but they also sometimes killed their own kind. This duality isn't unique to humans. Many social species show similar patterns: cooperation within groups coupled with competition or aggression between groups. What distinguishes humans is not the presence of these tendencies, but the scale and sophistication of their expression. With our expanded cognitive abilities, we've developed increasingly complex technologies that amplify both our cooperative and destructive capacities. We've created cultural systems that can either escalate or mitigate conflict. We've expanded our definition of who counts as us beyond small kinship groups to encompass nations, ideological communities, and sometimes even all of humanity. These cultural innovations build upon the foundation laid by species like Homo Heidelbergensis, but they take us in new directions. We aren't bound by the specific patterns of behavior that characterized our ancestors, even if we share underlying tendencies. The archaeological record of Homo Heidelbergensis shows evidence of both violence and care, both conflict and cooperation. This mirrors what we see throughout human history and in our present, not a simple story of either innate aggression or natural harmony, but a complex interplay of competing tendencies shaped by environment, culture, and choice. This complexity doesn't provide easy answers to questions about human nature, but it does offer a more nuanced understanding than simplistic narratives of humans as either inherently peaceful or inherently violent. We are capable of both, and which tendencies predominate depends on a host of factors, from resource availability to social structures, from cultural values to individual choices. By recognizing this complexity in our evolutionary past, we gain insights that can inform our present choices. We see that conflict isn't inevitable, but neither is it easily eliminated. We understand that peace requires not just good intentions, but supportive conditions, adequate resources, fair distribution, stable social structures, and cultural values that reward cooperation. And perhaps most importantly, we recognize our own agency in this story. While we inherit tendencies from our evolutionary past, we aren't determined by them. Through conscious choice and cultural innovation, we can shape which aspects of our nature find expression and which are channeled in more constructive directions. The archaeological evidence from Homo Heidelbergensis sites gives us glimpses into the lives of these ancient relatives, but much remains unknown or open to multiple interpretations. This uncertainty is an inherent aspect of studying the deep past, where we must piece together narratives from fragmentary remains separated from us by hundreds of thousands of years. When we find a skull with evidence of trauma, like cranium 17 from Cima de los Huesos, we can determine that the individual suffered 2 deliberate blows to the head, likely resulting in death, but we can't know with certainty who delivered these blows, why they did so, or what the social context might have been. Was this an execution of a group member who violated important norms? Was it the result of a personal conflict that escalated to lethal violence? Was it connected to a broader pattern of intergroup conflict? The physical evidence alone can't tell us. Similarly, when we find cut marks on bones indicating defleshing, as on the Bodo cranium, we can determine that stone tools were used to remove tissue shortly after death, but the purpose of this action, whether ritual, nutritional, or something else entirely may. Even seemingly straightforward evidence, like the wooden spears from Schoningen, allows for multiple readings. Were these weapons developed primarily for hunting animals, with any use against other humans being incidental, or did the threat of human rivals provide additional motivation for their development? This interpretive uncertainty isn't a weakness of archaeology, but a reminder of the complexity of human behavior and the limitations of our knowledge. It encourages a humility about our conclusions and an openness to revising our understanding as new evidence emerges. It also highlights the importance of integrating multiple lines of evidence, not just stone tools and bones, but environmental data, comparative studies of modern hunter-gatherers and primates, genetic analyses, and experimental archaeology that tests how ancient tools were made and used. By weaving together these diverse strands of evidence, researchers continue to refine our understanding of Homo heidelbergensis and their place in the human story. New discoveries and analytical techniques regularly add details to this picture, though many questions remain. What we can say with confidence is that Homo heidelbergensis were complex beings navigating a challenging world with intelligence, social sophistication, and technological skill. They weren't simple brutes, but thinking, feeling creatures making their way through life with the cognitive tools available to them. They faced many of the same basic challenges we do: finding food, raising young, maintaining social bonds, resolving conflicts, adapting to environmental changes. Their solutions to these challenges were different from ours in specific details, but similar in their fundamental approach, using technology, cooperation, and cultural learning to survive and sometimes thrive. In this sense, despite the hundreds of thousands of years that separate us, we share a common humanity with Homo heidelbergensis. Their story isn't just about a distant ancestor species, but about the emergence of distinctively human ways of being in the world, both the admirable and the troubling aspects. By understanding their lives, we gain insight into our own, not because we're identical to them, but because we're connected by a continuous thread of biological and cultural evolution. Their legacy lives on in our bodies, our behaviors, and perhaps even in the basic structures of our societies. As we continue to uncover and interpret the traces they left behind, we not only learn about our past, but gain perspective on our present and potential futures. The story of Homo heidelbergensis reminds us of both the depth of our evolutionary heritage and the uniqueness of our current moment. A species with unprecedented power to shape our environment and ourselves, standing at a crossroads of possibility. The migration patterns of Homo heidelbergensis across Africa, Europe, and possibly parts of Asia suggest a species with remarkable adaptability. Unlike earlier hominins who were largely confined to tropical and subtropical regions, Homo heidelbergensis successfully colonized temperate zones and even ventured into areas affected by glacial conditions during ice ages. This expansion required not just physical adaptations, but behavioral innovations, new hunting techniques suited to different prey species, new approaches to shelter in colder climates, perhaps even new forms of social organization to manage the challenges of seasonal resource fluctuations. The ability to adapt to such diverse environments through cultural rather than primarily biological means is a distinctively human trait. While other species evolve specialized biological adaptations to particular niches, humans have excelled at using technology and social learning to adapt rapidly to new conditions. Homo heidelbergensis appears to represent an important stage in the development of this capacity for cultural adaptation. Their technological sophistication and apparent ability to transmit knowledge across generations enabled them to thrive in environments quite different from those in which earlier hominins evolved. This adaptability would have served them well during the climatic fluctuations of the Middle Pleistocene, when glacial interglacial cycles repeatedly transformed landscapes within the span of a few thousand years. Groups that could innovate and adjust their strategies in response to changing conditions would have had significant advantages. It may also have influenced patterns of intergroup interaction during periods of environmental stress. When resources became concentrated in smaller areas, groups would have been forced into closer proximity, potentially increasing both competition and opportunities for cultural exchange. Under such conditions, the balance between conflict and cooperation between groups would have been dynamic, shifting in response to resource availability, population densities, historical relationships, and perhaps individual leadership decisions. This complex interplay between environmental conditions, technological capabilities, and social dynamics continues to shape human societies today. We still navigate tensions between cooperation and competition, between sharing resources and defending them, between maintaining group identities and building broader alliances. The specific challenges we face are different from those encountered by Homo Heidelbergensis, climate change driven by our own activities rather than natural cycles, resource depletion due to our unprecedented technological capacities, global interconnections that bring distant groups into contact in new ways. But the fundamental dynamics, adapting to environmental change, managing resources, navigating relationships between groups, would be recognizable to our ancient relatives. In this sense, understanding their story isn't just about satisfying curiosity about the past, but about gaining perspective on patterns that continue to shape our present. The technological achievements of Homo Heidelbergensis tell us not just about their material culture, but about their cognitive abilities and social organization. Creating effective tools requires not just manual dexterity, but planning, problem-solving, and the ability to mentally model the relationship between actions and outcomes. The consistency in design across multiple artifacts suggests shared knowledge and techniques, not just individual innovation, but cultural transmission of skills and standards. This capacity for cumulative culture, where innovations build upon previous developments rather than being reinvented by each individual, is a hallmark of human cognition. The sophistication of their hunting strategies, as evidenced by archaeological sites where large, dangerous prey were successfully killed and butchered, indicates not just technological skill but social coordination. Bringing down animals like rhinos or giant deer would have required teamwork, communication and trust, all complex social cognitive abilities. Even their potential intergroup conflicts, if they occurred as the evidence suggests, would have required advanced cognitive capabilities. Organized violence between groups involves planning, coordination, risk assessment, and possibly even rudimentary strategy, cognitive tasks of considerable complexity. These cognitive and social capabilities didn't appear suddenly, but evolved gradually over hundreds of thousands of years. Homo Heidelbergensis represents an important stage in this evolution, not yet possessing the full range of abstract thinking and symbolic representation seen in modern humans, but well beyond the cognitive abilities of earlier hominins. Their legacy lives on not just in our genes, but in our minds, in the basic cognitive structures that allow us to plan, cooperate, innovate, and adapt. When we solve problems collectively, when we teach skills to the next generation, when we coordinate our actions towards shared goals, we're building on foundations laid by species like Homo heidelbergensis hundreds of thousands of years ago. Understanding this deep continuity doesn't diminish the uniqueness of modern human cognition and culture, but places it in evolutionary context. We aren't separate from nature, but part of it, our extraordinary mental capabilities emerging through the same evolutionary processes that shape all life on Earth. This perspective encourages both humility and wonder. Humility about our place in nature's continuum, wonder at the remarkable journey that has produced a species capable of reflecting on its own origins and considering its future. The story of Homo Heidelbergensis is part of this larger narrative, not just ancient history, but a chapter in an ongoing story of which we are the current protagonists. As we face the unique challenges of our time, climate change, resource depletion, persistent conflicts, emerging technologies that transform our relationship with the world and each other, we do so with minds shaped by millions of years of evolution and hundreds of thousands of years of cultural development. The cognitive tools we bring to these challenges, our capacity for cooperation, innovation, planning, and moral reasoning, have deep roots extending back through Homo Heidelbergensis and beyond. By understanding these roots, we gain insight not just into where we came from, but into the resources we have for shaping where we're going. The story of Homo Heidelbergensis and their potential role as the first human hunters of other humans isn't just a tale of ancient violence. It's a complex narrative about the emergence of distinctively human ways of being, technological innovation, social cooperation, cultural learning, and yes, organized conflict. These capacities have enabled our remarkable success as a species, allowing us to adapt to diverse environments and create ever more sophisticated cultural systems. They've also given us the power to cause harm on unprecedented scales to ourselves and to the planet that sustains us. The challenge we face today, as it has been throughout human history, is how to channel these capacities in constructive rather than destructive directions, how to expand cooperation while managing conflict, how to use our technological powers wisely, how to balance immediate interests against long-term sustainability. The archaeological record of Homo Heidelbergensis doesn't provide simple answers to these challenges, but it does offer perspective. It reminds us that the tensions we navigate aren't new, but have deep roots in our evolutionary history. It shows us both the remarkable achievements possible through human cooperation and the darker potentials that we must continually work to channel and constrain. Most importantly, it places our current moment in the context of a much longer story, one in which humans have faced existential challenges before and found ways to adapt and survive. This doesn't guarantee our success in addressing contemporary challenges, but it does remind us of the remarkable adaptability and resilience that characterize our species. In the end, the story of Homo Heidelbergensis is neither a cautionary tale about innate human violence nor a nostalgic narrative about a lost golden age. It's a complex account of a species navigating many of the same fundamental challenges we face today, with different tools but similar underlying capacities and tendencies. By understanding this story in all its complexity, we gain not just knowledge of our past, but insights that can inform our present choices and future directions. The legacy of Homo Heidelbergensis isn't just in our genes and bodies, but in our ongoing struggle to create societies that bring out the best rather than the worst of our human potentials. As we continue to uncover and interpret the traces they left behind, we not only learn about an ancient human species, but gain perspective on what it means to be human in all its wonder and contradiction, its darkness and light. The archaeological evidence for Homo Heidelbergensis hunting other humans remains a topic of active research and debate. The cut marks on bones, traumatic injuries to skulls, and sophisticated weapons all suggest the possibility, but alternative interpretations exist for much of this evidence. Cut marks could represent mortuary practices rather than preparation for consumption. Traumatic injuries could result from intra-group conflicts rather than organized intergroup violence. Weapons developed for hunting animals could have been used against other humans only rarely or incidentally. This interpretive uncertainty is an inherent aspect of archaeology, particularly when dealing with remains hundreds of thousands of years old. We can observe patterns in the evidence and make reasonable inferences, but we should hold our conclusions lightly, remaining open to revisions as new evidence emerges. What we can say with greater confidence is that Homo heidelbergensis possessed the technological capabilities, cognitive abilities, and social organization necessary for systematic violence against other humans, whether or not they regularly engaged in such behavior. They crafted weapons capable of killing at a distance. They coordinated complex activities requiring planning and communication. They distinguished between members of their own group and others. These capacities, combined with the environmental pressures of the Middle Pleistocene, created conditions where intergroup conflict was at least possible, if not inevitable. The same capacities that enabled such conflict, technological innovation, social coordination, planning, also supported more constructive activities, cooperative hunting, care for injured group members, transmission of knowledge across generations. This duality, the capacity for both harm and help, violence and care, appears to be deeply rooted in human evolution. Understanding this complex legacy neither excuses violence nor predetermines our future. Instead, it provides context for the ongoing human project of creating social systems that channel our capacities in constructive rather than destructive directions. By recognizing both the light and shadow in our evolutionary heritage, we can approach this project with greater awareness, neither naively optimistic about human nature nor pessimistically resigned to inevitable conflict, but realistically engaged with the full range of human potentials. The story of Homo heidelbergensis reminds us that we are neither angels nor demons, but complex beings shaped by millions of years of evolution and hundreds of thousands of years of cultural development. Our future isn't written in our genes, but will emerge from the interplay of our evolutionary heritage, our cultural innovations, and the choices we make individually and collectively. This perspective encourages both humility and hope. Humility about the challenges of channeling human tendencies toward peaceful and sustainable outcomes. Hope based on our demonstrated capacity for cooperation, innovation, and moral reasoning. As we face the unique challenges of our time, from climate change to resource depletion to persistent conflicts, we do so not as beings separate from nature, but as part of its ongoing story, a story in which species like Homo heidelbergensis played important roles, leaving legacies that continue to shape our present and influence our possible futures. By understanding this deep history, we gain not just knowledge of the past, but insights that can inform our navigation of the present and our creation of the future. The story of Homo heidelbergensis isn't just about where we came from, but about who we are and who we might become. If we could somehow travel back in time and observe a band of Homo heidelbergensis going about their daily lives, what might we see? While speculative, such a mental exercise can help bring these ancient relatives to life based on the archaeological evidence and our understanding of human evolution. Perhaps we'd witness a small group of 15 to 20 individuals camped near a river or lake. Some would be crafting tools, carefully shaping stone with practiced movements passed down through generations. Others might be processing animal hides or plant materials, preparing food, or creating items for daily use. Children would be playing nearby, perhaps imitating the adults' activities in ways that simultaneously provided entertainment and developed crucial skills they would need as they matured. Older individuals might be sharing their knowledge with younger ones, not through formal teaching, but through demonstration and guided participation. If we could follow them on a hunt, we might see sophisticated coordination as they tracked and surrounded large prey, communicating through a combination of vocalizations, gestures, and shared understanding built through previous experiences together. Their use of spears would show both technical skill and strategic thinking as they positioned themselves to minimize risk while maximizing the chance of a successful kill. Back at camp, we might observe the distribution of meat from the hunt, with specific sharing patterns reflecting social relationships and obligations within the group. We might see care being provided to injured or ill individuals, evidence of bonds that extended beyond immediate utilitarian concerns. And perhaps, if we watched long enough, we might witness moments of tension and conflict, disagreements over resources or status, jealousies or grudges that erupted into confrontations. We might see how these conflicts were managed or resolved through a combination of social pressure, leadership interventions, or in some cases, violence. If we could observe interactions with neighboring groups, we might see a complex mix of avoidance, cautious engagement, occasional trading or mating, and sometimes hostile encounters. The specific dynamics would likely vary based on historical relationships, resource availability, and perhaps even personal connections across group boundaries. Such a scene would feel both familiar and strange to modern eyes. We would recognize many of the basic social dynamics and emotional expressions, the technological problem-solving and care for group members. But we would also encounter differences in specific behaviors, communication systems, and cultural practices that have evolved over the hundreds of thousands of years, separating us from Homo Heidelbergensis. What might be most striking is the fundamental humanity of these ancient relatives, not identical to us, but connected by an unbroken thread of biological and cultural evolution in their struggles and achievements, their cooperation and conflicts, their innovations and traditions. We would see reflections of our own human experience, different in specific expressions but similar in basic structure. This imaginative exercise, while necessarily speculative, reminds us that the archaeological remains we study were created by living, breathing, thinking beings navigating many of the same basic challenges we face today: finding food, raising young, maintaining social bonds, resolving conflicts, adapting to environmental changes. The stone tools, fossilized bones, and other traces they left behind aren't just scientific specimens, but windows into the lives of our ancestors, lives filled with the same mix of joy and sorrow, cooperation and conflict, struggle and achievement that characterizes human experience across time and space. By approaching these remains with this awareness, we study not just ancient artifacts, but the human story itself, a story in which we are the latest chapter rather than separate observers. The legacy of Homo Heidelbergensis lives on not just in museums and academic papers, but in our bodies, behaviors, and societies, a continuing influence on who we are and who we might become. The world inhabited by Homo Heidelbergensis was dramatically different from our own in many respects. During glacial periods, vast ice sheets covered much of northern Europe, while the Mediterranean region experienced cooler and often drier conditions than today. In Africa, climate fluctuations brought alternating periods of humidity and aridity, expanding and contracting the savannas, forests, and deserts. These environmental shifts occurred over thousands of years, rapid in geological terms, but slow enough that individuals would have experienced them as stable conditions rather than dramatic changes within a single lifetime. The fauna surrounding Homo heidelbergensis included many species now extinct: massive straight-tusked elephants in Europe, giant buffalo in Africa, saber-toothed cats across multiple continents. these animals weren't just part of the background, but integral to human survival as both prey and potential predators. The landscapes themselves would appear both familiar and strange to modern eyes. The basic geographical features, mountains, rivers, coastlines, would be recognizable, but the vegetation, animal life, and patterns of human presence would differ significantly from what we see today. Perhaps most strikingly, Homo Heidelbergensis inhabited a world where they weren't the only human species. During much of their existence, other hominin species coexisted in the same general regions, creating potential for both competition and interaction. This multi-species context raises fascinating questions about how Homo heidelbergensis might have perceived and related to other types of humans. Did they recognize them as similar to themselves but different? Did they have concepts analogous to our ideas of species or race? Did they tell stories about these other beings, creating cultural frameworks for understanding and relating to them? The archaeological record can't directly answer these questions, but the evidence of both violence and interbreeding between later human species suggests complex and varied relationships, sometimes hostile, sometimes cooperative, sometimes reproductive. This complexity mirrors what we see in human relations throughout history and into our present, a mix of conflict and cooperation, division and connection that defines our social existence. The specific expressions change across time and space, but the fundamental dynamics persist. By placing Homo heidelbergensis in their environmental and multi-species context, we gain a more complete picture of their lives and challenges. We see them not as isolated specimens, but as beings embedded in complex ecological and social systems, navigating relationships with other species, both human and non-human, and adapting to changing environmental conditions. This contextual understanding enriches our appreciation of their technological and social innovations. The sophisticated tools they crafted, the hunting strategies they developed, the social structures they maintained, all represent solutions to the specific challenges posed by their world, solutions that enabled them to survive and sometimes thrive in diverse and changing environments. It also helps us recognize the continuities and discontinuities between their world and ours. While the specific environmental conditions and ecological relationships have changed dramatically, many of the basic challenges, adapting to environmental change, managing resources, navigating social complexity, remain relevant to our contemporary experience. This deep time perspective can be both humbling and empowering. It reminds us that our current moment is just one chapter in a much longer story, that the challenges we face, while serious, are not unprecedented in human experience. It also highlights the remarkable adaptability and resilience that have characterized humans throughout our evolutionary history, qualities that may serve us well as we navigate our own environmental and social challenges. The story of Homo heidelbergensis doesn't provide simple answers to contemporary questions, but it does offer valuable context, reminding us of both the depth of our evolutionary heritage and the uniqueness of our current situation, with its unprecedented technological capacities, global interconnections, and environmental impacts. By understanding this deep history, we gain perspective on our present moment, neither minimizing the seriousness of our current challenges nor viewing them as entirely unprecedented or insurmountable. We see ourselves as part of a continuing human story, drawing on capacities with deep evolutionary roots while facing circumstances unique to our time. This perspective encourages both responsibility and hope. Responsibility based on recognition of our unprecedented power to shape our environment and ourselves, hope grounded in awareness of the remarkable adaptability and resilience that have characterized humans throughout our long evolutionary journey. The legacy of Homo Heidelbergensis lives on in each of us, in our bodies, our behaviors, our societies. By understanding their story, we gain insight not just into our past, but into our present and the possible futures we might create. As archaeological research continues, our understanding of Homo Heidelbergensis and their place in human evolution will undoubtedly evolve. New discoveries may clarify currently ambiguous evidence, advanced analytical techniques may extract more information from existing finds, and theoretical frameworks may shift to accommodate emerging data. This ongoing process of discovery and interpretation is itself a testament to distinctively human capacities, our curiosity about our origins, our ability to systematically investigate the past, our drive to understand not just the what, but the why and how of our existence. These same capacities, curiosity, systematic inquiry, meaning-making, likely emerged gradually during human evolution, with species like Homo heidelbergensis representing important stages in their development when they crafted increasingly sophisticated tools. When they adapted to new environments, when they cared for injured group members, they were expressing cognitive and social abilities that would eventually lead to science, art, philosophy, and all the other dimensions of human culture. In this sense, when we study Homo heidelbergensis, we're not just learning about an extinct species, but about the emergence of qualities that define our own humanity. We're tracing the development of capacities that now allow us to contemplate our origins and consider our future. A remarkable evolutionary feedback loop where the products of evolution reflect on the process that produced them. This capacity for self-reflection, for asking not just what is, but what should be, may be our most distinctive feature as a species. It's what allows us to recognize both the light and shadow in our evolutionary heritage and to make conscious choices about which aspects of our nature we want to express and cultivate. The evidence that Homo heidelbergensis may have been the first human hunters of other humans doesn't determine our future. It's not a justification for violence or an indication that conflict is inevitable. Rather, it's information that can inform our ongoing project of creating societies that bring out the best rather than the worst of our human potentials. By understanding both the cooperative and competitive aspects of our evolutionary heritage, we can design social systems, educational approaches, and cultural frameworks that support our better tendencies while providing constructive channels for the energies that might otherwise fuel destructive conflict. This isn't about denying or suppressing aspects of our nature, but about consciously shaping the contexts in which they find expression, creating conditions where cooperation is rewarded more than exploitation, where diversity is valued rather than feared, where conflicts can be resolved without violence. The story of Homo heidelbergensis reminds us that we are complex beings with diverse potentials for both extraordinary cooperation and calculated violence, for both deep empathy and rigid tribalism, for both creative problem-solving and destructive exploitation. Which aspects predominate depends not just on our genes, but on our cultural systems, social structures, and individual choices. In this recognition lies both responsibility and possibility. Responsibility for creating conditions that bring out our better nature, possibility for societies more peaceful and sustainable than those we've often created in the past. The legacy of Homo heidelbergensis isn't a blueprint for our future, but a starting point for reflection on who we are and who we might become. As we continue to uncover and interpret the traces they left behind, we gain not just knowledge of an ancient human species, but perspective on our own complex nature, a perspective that can inform our navigation of present challenges and our creation of future possibilities. The wooden spears crafted by Homo Heidelbergensis ancestors remain among the most remarkable archaeological discoveries associated with this species. Found at Schöningen, Germany, and dating to around 400,000 years ago, these weapons represent a level of technological sophistication that challenges simplistic notions of primitive early humans. Made from spruce wood, the spears average around 2 meters in length and show careful shaping to create aerodynamic properties. The distribution of weight, with the center of gravity in the front third, optimizes them for throwing, a design principle still used in modern javelins. To create these weapons, the makers had to select appropriate wood, remove the bark, and laboriously shape the spears using stone tools, a process requiring hours of focused work. The consistency across multiple spears indicates standardized production methods, suggesting cultural transmission of specific techniques rather than individual improvisation. These aren't crude clubs or simple pointed sticks, but sophisticated implements designed for a specific purpose, killing at a distance. They represent both technological innovation and the ability to mentally project into the future, to envision a finished product and the steps needed to create it. The spears would have transformed hunting strategies, allowing humans to strike from a safer distance rather than engaging in the high-risk practice of close-quarter attacks on dangerous prey. This technological adaptation would have provided significant advantages, potentially increasing hunting success while decreasing injuries and deaths among hunters. But technologies rarely have singular implications. The same spears effective against horses or deer would have been equally effective against other humans. The capacity to project force at a distance would have changed the dynamics of intergroup conflict, just as it changed the dynamics of hunting. This dual potential for both subsistence and violence characterizes many human technological innovations throughout history, from stone tools to nuclear energy. Technologies themselves are neutral. Their impact depends on how they're used, which in turn reflects both environmental circumstances and cultural values. The wooden spears of Schöningen represent an important milestone in this ongoing story of human technological development. Not the beginning, certainly not the end, but a significant stage in our increasing ability to shape our environment and each other through tool use. They remind us that technological sophistication isn't unique to modern humans or even to Homo sapiens generally, but has deep roots in our evolutionary history. Homo Heidelbergensis wasn't just making do with crude implements, but actively innovating, creating tools that required planning, precision, and cultural learning. This capacity for technological innovation, combined with social cooperation and cultural transmission of knowledge, has been a defining feature of humans throughout our evolution. It's enabled our remarkable adaptability, allowing us to thrive in diverse environments and respond to changing conditions. It's also given us unprecedented power to shape our world, for better and worse. The same cognitive and social capacities that produced the Schöningen spears have produced modern technologies that can feed billions, cure diseases, and connect people across continents. They've also produced weapons of mass destruction, environmental degradation, and systems of exploitation. The challenge we face today, as it has been throughout human history, is how to channel our technological capabilities in constructive rather than destructive directions, how to create tools that enhance rather than diminish life, that expand rather than contract possibilities for flourishing. The wooden spears of Homo heidelbergensis, with their dual potential for subsistence and violence, remind us that this challenge isn't new but has deep roots in our evolutionary history. They invite us to reflect on the relationship between our tools and our humanity, between our technological powers and our ethical responsibilities. By understanding this deep history of human technology, we gain perspective on our current moment, a time of unprecedented technological capacity and equally unprecedented global challenges. We see ourselves not as being separate from nature, but as part of its ongoing story, with unique responsibilities stemming from our unique capabilities. This perspective encourages both humility and hope. Humility about our place in nature's continuum, hope based on our demonstrated capacity for innovation, cooperation, and ethical reasoning. The wooden spears of Schoningen aren't just ancient artifacts, but windows into the emergence of distinctively human ways of being in the world, technological, social, cultural, that continue to shape our present and will influence our future. If you've stayed with this story until now, you've looked into the darker corners of human prehistory with us. Homo heidelbergensis wasn't just a bridge between species. They may have been the first to demonstrate that survival sometimes means becoming your own worst enemy, a predator that hunts its own image. And the echoes of that behaviour, as we're reminded every day in our world, never really stopped. The capacity for violence against our own kind remains with us, alongside our remarkable abilities for cooperation, compassion, and care. The archaeological evidence from sites like Cima de los Huesos and Bodo tells a complex story, not a simple narrative of killer apes, but a nuanced account of beings navigating harsh environmental conditions with the cognitive and social tools available to them. These weren't monsters, but our ancestors, beings whose legacy lives on in our bodies, our behaviours, and our societies. Their story isn't separate from ours, but an early chapter in the ongoing human narrative, a narrative that includes both extraordinary achievements and troubling potentials. By understanding this deep history, we gain perspective on our present moment, neither naively optimistic about human nature nor pessimistically resigned to inevitable conflict, but realistically engaged with the full range of human potentials. We see more clearly both where we came from and the choices before us about who we might become. The story of Homo heidelbergensis reminds us that we are neither angels nor demons, but complex beings shaped by millions of years of evolution and hundreds of thousands of years of cultural development. Our future isn't written in our genes, but will emerge from the interplay of our evolutionary heritage, our cultural innovations, and the choices we make individually and collectively. This perspective encourages both responsibility and possibility. Responsibility for creating conditions that bring out our better nature. Possibility for societies more peaceful and sustainable than those we've often created in the past. As we face the unique challenges of our time, from climate change to resource depletion to persistent conflicts, we do so not as being separate from nature, but as part of its ongoing story, a story in which species like Homo heidelbergensis played important roles, leaving legacies that continue to shape our present and influence our possible futures. By understanding this story in all its complexity, both its light and its shadow, we gain insights that can inform our navigation of current challenges and our creation of future possibilities. We recognize both the depth of our evolutionary heritage and the uniqueness of our current moment, with its unprecedented technological capacities, global interconnections, and environmental impacts. The legacy of Homo heidelbergensis isn't a blueprint for our future, but a starting point for reflection on who we are and who we might become. By studying these ancient relatives, we learn not just about them, but about ourselves, our capabilities, our contradictions, our potential. Their story is our story, not in the sense that we're identical to them, but in the sense that we're connected by an unbroken thread of biological and cultural evolution in their struggles and achievements, their cooperation and conflicts, their innovations and traditions. We see reflections of our own human experience, different in specific expressions, but similar in basic structure. This deep continuity doesn't determine our future, but provides context for our ongoing project of creating societies that nurture our better tendencies while providing constructive channels for the energies that might otherwise fuel destructive conflict. As we continue to uncover and interpret the traces they left behind, we gain not just knowledge of the past, but perspective that can inform our present choices and future directions, a perspective that encompasses both the remarkable achievements and troubling potentials of being human.